Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Monday, June 3rd, 2013, start of a brand new week. All kinds of things we have to talk about coming in from this last weekend. All kinds of things going on in Turkey. We need to be spending a lot of time on that. Pentagate is continuing to heat up, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, managing the Truth Warp Drive, ready to answer the phone when you call on in with whatever your particular concerns and perspectives happen to be. Now, the protests in Turkey have spread pretty much across the entire country. Huge, huge crowds. We're looking at the images that are coming out over the internet of Turkey. It is already looking like Cairo. This is a huge, huge mass uprising, shades of Egypt, shades of Romania. And it was this little flashpoint, this little park that Erdogan announced they were going to tear it down and put up a shopping mall. And by the way, the developer of the shopping mall is Erdogan's son-in-law. A little bit of corruption there. By the way, did you know Erdogan earns a salary of almost $1 million every single month? Man of the people? I don't think so. One of the common themes that we're seeing in the protests is saying to Erdogan, you're not a sultan. You're just a prime minister. You're supposed to be working for the country. And so the message we are seeing from the Turkish protesters, this is not just about a park. It's about abuse of state power. It's about media being censored. It's about minorities not being protected. It is about democracy, and it is a genuine uprising. I'm getting all kinds of email saying that, oh, no, this is just Operation Gladio. It's a CIA plot. You don't want to support them or call attention to them. It's another CIA overthrow. No, it isn't. And you know how you tell the difference? When it's the CIA trying to create a revolution out of thin air, it's a tiny, well-funded crowd of troublemakers pretending to represent the majority of the public. We saw that in Iran back in 2009. That fell on its face. We're seeing it now in Syria with all this funding that's going in to the Free Syria Army, 95% of whom are not Syrian, trying to say, oh yes, we speak for the people, even as that Free Syria Army is beheading Syrian civilians, they're attacking Christians, and just not at all behaving like a genuine grassroots revolution. But here in Turkey, it just spread like wildfire everywhere. The parallels with Romania and Egypt cannot be ignored at this point. So this is very, very much a real problem that is going on over there. And obviously for the United States, pardon me, it's a major problem, because if Turkey changes governments, then the U.S. has lost its northern front for the upcoming war into Syria. A new incoming Turkish government is obviously not going to be very much obligated to do what the U.S. says, and in fact, that's a big part of the Turkish people's anger with Erdogan, is his unquestioning support for this war into Syria, which the U.S. wants and Israel wants. And the Turkish people remember how Israel did murder several of their citizens in cold blood in international waters, and they're wondering why Erdogan, after such a horrible insult, continues to basically tow the U.S. and Israeli agenda in Syria. And the photos are definitely coming out. The police were actually videotaped literally running over protesters in their trucks. And remember, when Mubarak started doing that in Cairo is when world opinion turned against Mubarak and sided with the protesters. And so Erdogan's already made the same mistake Mubarak did. It is definitely looking like Cairo over there. We're coming up on a break. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with more about Turkey and the protests and its larger geopolitical import. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about what's going on over in Turkey. It is a huge mass uprising by the entire population. It is spread all across Turkey. It's in Ankara. It's all over. It really is. The Turkish police over the weekend had to abandon that square, that park, where this flashed into open rebellion. They're back using water cannons and tear gas trying to disperse the protesters. They have arrested thousands so far. They're using brutal tactics. There was even one report coming out that the water cannon trucks were being loaded with raw sewage as a means to try and get the Turkish people back into their homes. And, of course, every time you do something like this, it only enrages people more, and that's the reaction we're seeing. And the Turkish police are basically engaged in what amounts to open warfare against the Turkish people. They're apparently they're vandalizing property. They are smashing through windows in stores in order to gas the protesters. There's no respect for the private property of those Turks who are not part of the demonstrations. It's just turning into a war zone over there. And we're hearing about police violence in Istanbul, Izmir, and Ankara. It's just spreading all over the place. As I mentioned earlier, video has surfaced showing the Turkish police running over crowds of protesters with their large trucks. And when Mubarak did that in Cairo is when world opinion shifted away from Mubarak and sided with the protesters, and it stands to reason the same thing's going to happen here. When a government uses violence against its people, it destroys its own legitimacy. Apparently there's another story coming out that a fully automatic military-style AK-47 was found in a police car that had been heavily damaged and flipped over by the protesters. And so they're already there's already automatic weapons out there being trained on the crowds. Now, Turkey is protesting, basically, I'm sorry, I misread that. Let's see, Besiktas, the city of Besiktas, there's now a clash between protesters and police there. And again, they're responding with tear gas and water cannon. It is clearly an authoritarian attempt to keep the population under control. It's certainly not democratic. And Erdogan is out there. Over the weekend, he ordered the protesters to disperse. They ignored him, as I'm sure you and I would have. And he's out there saying the protest, it's not a Turkish spring. It is not a Turkish spring out there. And he may be right on that. I think it's more of a get out, you're fired message that is coming from the Turkish people here. And Erdogan's just falling back on the old propaganda things. Oh, the protesters are extremists. Well, when it's the majority of the population, it's kind of hard to say they're the extremists. Actually, that's the mainstream opinion he's dealing with. And Erdogan cannot see the writing on the wall, which is a symptom all authoritarian leaders share. You people monitoring my show for the White House, take note. And Erdogan is just trying to find somebody to blame. It's the opposition parties, it's the media, it's the extremists. And now, of course, he's putting the blame on social media. And over the weekend, Turkey attempted to shut down all the Twitter and Facebook feeds coming out from Turkey to the world, and of course, it's not really working. People are sending out the information via email, and it's being posted to Twitter and Facebook and the web from everywhere else on the planet. But Erdogan is now out there saying Twitter and Facebook is a menace. It's a danger to society. I'm sure Obama thinks much the same, based on some comments he was making a couple of weeks ago about how the Internet is the cause of domestic terrorism in this country. What it is the world leaders are waking up to something I have been telling you for going on 10 years. The age in which leaders could lie to their people with impunity is over and done with, and it is not coming back. We have this article coming out of what is happening in Istanbul.com, which is obviously recently created website, where they're just talking about how the resistance in Gezi Park has created its own media network, ad hoc around the world, and the news is getting out. And because it's being covered so intensively here on the Internet, finally the American corporate media is having to report on it. They're still trying to portray it as simply a dispute over this Gezi Park, and ignoring the larger rage and anger by the Turkish people against their government that has just sparked this all across Turkey. Now, Syria, of course, is taking advantage of this opportunity to basically say, obviously, Erdogan is not a legitimate leader when he's responding to protests with violence. And that raises a very interesting question, because if the real purpose for the U.S. support of the rebels, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, in Syria is to free the Syrian people from a dictator, then why isn't the U.S. sending in guns and ammo for the Turkish protesters who are really Turkish citizens, unlike the Free Syria Army, 95% of whom are not Syrian? And clearly these protesters in Turkey do represent a majority of the population. You've got to look at those aerial photos of the streets. It does look like Cairo all over again. But it just shows the double standard. The U.S. is going to fuel the rebellion, or rather support the rebellion only when the rebellion is aimed at a leader they don't like. Now, possibly because of what's going on in Turkey, we're seeing other protests start to spark up. Apparently over in Ethiopia, there was an anti-government procession on Sunday. This is the first large-scale protest since back in 2005, when there were riots following what appeared to most people to be a completely fraudulent election. So everybody's getting unhappy. Now, going over to the war zone, speaking of Syria and the rest of it, you know, Israel's getting all upset over Russia's determination to supply the S-300 air defense missiles to Assad's Syrian regime. And Israel's screaming, Hezbollah could get these missiles, meaning Lebanon. And they're saying, this can't be allowed to happen. This is going to cause all kinds of problems. Well, you need to remember something about the S-300. It is an air defense system. It is not a surface-to-surface land attack missile. If Hezbollah and Lebanon gets the S-300, they cannot use them to attack Israel. All they can use them for is to shoot down Israeli warplanes that continue to violate Lebanon's airspace. And by the way, Israel is still doing it. Over this last weekend, they're flying low-level missions over Lebanon. They're rattling the windows and trying to make a point that we can come and go anywhere we want and you can't stop us. And that's why the possibility of Lebanon getting their hands on one of these S-300s is very upsetting. Israel's attitude is, we can go anywhere we want, and you can't stop us, and you're not allowed to shoot back at us when we bomb you, and you're not allowed to shoot back at us when we just, drop landmines all over your place. We want that Litani River, and you're not allowed to fight back when we take it. And that's why Israel's knickers are in a twist over this S-300. The S-300 is not a threat to Israel itself. It's a threat to Israel's plans of conquest and invasion. Now, an interesting development over the weekend coming out of Iraq. The Iraq government has told Israel they will not be allowed to use Iraqi airspace in the event of a strike against Iran. And this is another indicator that the puppet regime installed in Iraq by the United States is straining at their leash. And I understand what they're thinking. This whole war in Iraq was sold to the American people about weapons of mass destruction, which turned out not to exist, and opposing Al-Qaeda. And it turned out that Iraq and Al-Qaeda were ideological enemies. And it was all about, 9/11. We have George W. Bush on video admitting Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And, of course, George Bush should know who was really behind 9/11. So government of Iraq understands that the United States could not possibly sell a new invasion of Iraq to the American people. What's Washington, D.C. going to say? Oh, those uppity people in Baghdad, they're not doing what we tell them. We've got to reinvade and reconquer. The American people aren't going to buy that. And so all these countries that have been regime changed by the United States are now realizing they've got a good 2 years where they can do whatever they want. And the U.S. is not going to be able to overtly invade and take them over again. I'm sure there's a lot of covert stuff going on. In Iraq, Iraq's government is showing a rather amazing amount of independence. Of course, if I were in Iran, I wouldn't shut off the radars pointing toward Iraq anyway, because Israel will just fly through Iraq anyway, regardless of what the government says. Just like they're doing in Lebanon right now. Just like they're doing over Syria. Israel does not listen to other governments of sovereign territories when they're mapping out their air routes. They just sort of go wherever they want to go and then scream bloody murder if the countries they're overflying and bombing dare to get an air defense system. Now, according to NATO data, Assad is winning the war for the Syrians' hearts and minds, and this is a huge backflash from the fact that many of these hired mercenaries the United States has been supporting, and McCain was just photographed posing with, are al-Qaeda extremists. And even those Syrians who were initially on the side of the rebels are saying, no, we don't want to have a new government that's formed of al-Qaeda, and they're defecting back to Assad. And that's why the U.S. is trying to find some way to sell a direct intervention into Syria to the American people. The hired mercenary army has failed. It's been 2.5 years trying to overthrow Assad. And they're failing miserably. And so the U.S. is trying to, we've got to come up with some reason to go in there, and just go in and smash the place again. Because they dare to not have a Rothschild central bank in there. Going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about what's going on in Syria and Turkey. And a comment in the WhatReallyHappened.com chat room is that, oh, yes, you can use the S-300 to hit a ground target. And, yeah, technically you can. If you shoot the S-300 someplace, it's going to hit something if it doesn't hit an airplane. But it cannot be used to target a specific target on the ground, because the S-300, like the Patriot, is guided by a ground-based radar that must see the target in the sky, and it paints the aircraft or the missile with a radar targeting beam that the missile itself homes in on. And if the radar can't see a target, like a building on the other side of the national border, the S-300 can't find it. And you can't paint a single building in the middle of a crowded block. You're going to get reflections all over the place. It's not designed to do that. Plus, the S-300, like the Patriot, only carries enough of an explosive warhead to destroy an airplane. And true surface-to-surface land attack missiles carry much larger warheads, or cluster bombs. So this idea that the S-300 represents a threat to the physical territory of Israel itself is nonsense. It's going to be no more effective than those bottle rockets that Israeli agents provocateurs fire from Gaza into Israel that always hit an empty field. Now, a listener just sent in over email, apparently the Huffington Post, and we're going to be taking them to task in a little bit further in the show. Huffington Post is carrying as their banner headline that major companies avoid paying $92 billion in U.S. taxes. Now, we've been talking about this for close to 20 years, about how corporations get all these tax breaks. And now Huffington Post, like so much of the American corporate media, they're trying to find things that they can talk about so they can avoid talking about Turkey. Or if they talk about Turkey, it's all about that little shopping mall and park, and there's nothing else to pay attention to. And the reason is very, very simple. The corporate media and the U.S. government don't want you American slaves getting any uppity ideas. They're absolutely terrified that something like Cairo or Istanbul or Ankara could actually start happening here. A real, genuine revolution they would not be able to control, unlike that staged, coquettish armed march, which I am still convinced was intended to have this little tiny, easily defeatable armed revolution they could crush down as an object lesson to the rest of us slaves. So they're clearly very worried about that. Now, getting back into Syria, and this is an article we're getting from InformationClearinghouse.com, and it repeats something we've heard before. The Syrian Rebel Alliance, the Free Syria Army, al-Nusra, are openly threatening ethnic cleansing of any new territories they conquer. And again, that's one of the reasons why the Syrian people, who might have been kindly disposed toward a revolution to oust Assad, are now defecting back to Assad's side. Because they saw what happened in Iraq, where Saddam Hussein, who had a secular government where all religions were granted equal status, and the new government came in, and there's all kinds of persecution and repression going on, and demonstrably the Free Syria Army and al-Nusra, if they come to power, they're going to have an official state religion that is going to be used to crush down everybody else. And there have already been attacks against Christians and various other minor religions inside Syria, and the Syrian people do not want that. Let's see now. The United Nations Security Council wanted to pass a declaration criticizing the Syrian government's siege of the city of Qusair. And Russia vetoed it. And Russia was correct to do this because the United Nations Security Council did nothing when the Free Syria Army, the hired mercenaries, took the city and committed atrocities. And now that the government of Syria is taking that city back, they want to issue criticism. Russia's legitimacy and credibility just grew, while that of the UN Security Council continues to plummet. And as we look at all the various governments and leaders who are involved in this mess in the Middle East, Russia's the only adult in the room at the moment. I remember when I was a kid, the Russians are coming was seen as a bad thing. Not anymore. Okay, apparently, this is out of the Daily Star. Pro-Hezbollah Sheikh Mar Hamoud, who's a preacher, clergy, survived a shooting attempt in the southern city of Sidon. And basically they opened fire on him from a car. It was a drive-by shooting. And he survived. And I mention this only because if you remember last week, there was news that there had been an assassination plot against Assad that was foiled. And over the weekend, Ahmadinejad was traveling across Iran in his helicopter and had to have an emergency landing because of an unspecified problem with the helicopter. So it looks to me like somebody is trying to solve all their Mideast geopolitical problems with some wet work. And we'll probably see more of that coming on as well. Let's see, over at Blacklisted News, interesting article about the collapse of Iraq shows the bankruptcy of interventionism. And they're absolutely right about that. Iraq is much worse off since the U.S. went in. But then making life better for the Iraqis was never really the agenda. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Just as a little side note regarding the commercials you just heard for Infidel Body Armor, I went over and I took a look at their website. I personally don't need body armor, but as I was looking at these vests with the Velcro and all the little pouches that you can pick and choose to hang onto it for whatever you're carrying, and the first thing that came through my mind is, what a fabulous camera vest. For those of you who are into photography, and you're like me, you like to go around with a whole bunch of lenses and stuff like that. I mean, to use this to make up your own custom-made photographer or videographer's vest. You know, I'm going to be looking into it for that particular application. All righty, getting back to more serious news here. We were talking before the break about the collapse of Iraq, showing how interventionism has gone bankrupt. Now, you need to remember that although we were all told that the invasion of Iraq was about saving the Iraqi people from the cruel Saddam Hussein, weapons of mass destruction, Al-Qaeda, 9/11, the reality is it was all about forcing Iraq's oil back onto the world market only for the U.S. dollar. Remember, 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro. 1 year later, the U.S. invades, lynches Saddam, takes control of the oil infrastructure, and the Iraqi oil is back on the world market, but only for the U.S. dollar. Meanwhile, life in Iraq has just gone downhill. There's all kinds of sectarian violence going on, bombings, shootings. It's just deteriorated into chaos inside Iraq. But as long as the oil is flowing and only being sold for dollars, the U.S. true agenda in Iraq has been accomplished. But for world opinion, which was sold that war on weapons of mass destruction and making life better for Iraq, it's obviously a complete failure, and therefore we should not pay any attention anymore when new wars are proposed to save the people from a cruel tyrant like they're using to sell the intervention in Syria. Down in Greece, 3 firebombs were set off near government offices. I guess the people of Greece are as upset with their economy and their government as the people of Iceland or Cyprus or pretty much anywhere else. As a matter of fact, there's another huge protest going on up in Germany around the entrance of the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. And again, the media is calling these anti-capitalist protesters, they call it the Blockupy movement, but they are not anti-capitalist because we don't live in a capitalist system any longer. We live under economic fascism. And I know I've said this before, but for the benefit of the new listeners, and I know we got a bunch of new listeners listening to our program right now, a couple of real quick definitions here. Capitalism is a system in which if you make money, you are allowed to keep it. If you lose money, you must live with that debt. Freedom means the freedom to succeed coupled with the freedom to fail and the responsibility for both. Now, under communism or socialism, if you make a lot of money, it is taxed away from you for the betterment of all society. When you lose money, society is taxed to cover the losses so you can pick up and start over and try again. That's socialism. Under fascism, if you make money, you're allowed to keep it. But if you lose money, then society is taxed to cover the losses. And that's where we are here in the United States of America, with TARP and all the bailouts and all the rest of the looting of America to keep the banking system propped up a little bit longer. And Europe is going through exactly the same thing. Because when you are a nation slaved to a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, inevitably you descend into fascism. And I'm not the only one saying that. Lenin predicted when Western capitalism started to fail, it would inevitably become fascistic. He's absolutely right. Absolutely right. So over in Germany, protesters surrounded and blocked the entrance to the European Central Bank in Frankfurt and basically said, we call up everyone to join our protests. And these protesters have the right target. Because the common enemy of all humankind are those private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, a system designed to plunge nations and people into permanent debt slavery. When we talk about the blueprint for the new America, the top priority has to be to return the public currency to being a public utility and not another privatized money-making scam for the private central bankers. Now, over at blacklistednews.com, they had an article, Are We on the Brink of World War III? And I would argue we're already in it. I am certain that the history books 50 years hence will look back and say that at the dawn of 2013, the World War had already begun, even though most people didn't recognize it. And if you go back and you look at the history of World War I and history of World War II, you will find that nations were in conflict all over the world before there was that one catalyzing event that marked the official beginning of, oh yes, it's a world war, let's rock and roll. And same situation here. The United States has already invaded a dozen countries on 2 continents. Under U.S. military doctrine, it's already a world war. They're just waiting for the big bang, the big event, the big battle that says, oh yes, we're at war with everybody now. And of course, we're going to lose this one. The United States does not have the money, the manufacturing, or the manpower to prevail in a conventional global conflict. And that means sometime between now and final capitulation by the United States government, they're going to start using those nuclear weapons. And even then, they will not prevail. But you know, the bankers who are behind these wars, they don't care which side wins or loses. They love wars because both sides go into debt to fight the war. And after it's all over, both sides have to go even deeper into debt to rebuild from the war. And when it's all over, this horrible little process of using a war to solve your Ponzi scheme banking failures, ordinary people have pretty much what they had before it all started, except the graveyards are a lot bigger, and they're back into debt to the bankers for another 50 to 100 years. That's the scam. Prior to the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war. Now we're on the doorstep of number 3. And it's inevitably tied to these private central banks because by design they build more debt than money with which to pay the debt until it's on the verge of collapsing, and that's when the wars get started. It was true in World War I, was true in World War II, and it's certainly true in big mistake number 3. And to show you how close and how dangerous this is getting, Russia has resumed deployment of nuclear ballistic missile submarines to the southern hemisphere. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russians dialed in their submarine fleet, tied them all up at the pier, and said, that's it, we don't need to do this nonsense any longer. But with the United States continuing to invade countries that are strategically important to Russia, and with the propaganda against Russia starting to crank up ever since they took control of their central bank, Russia knows what's coming. And so they're resuming deployment of ballistic missile nuclear submarines in the southern hemisphere. That is a message to the United States of America that Russia will not go back to Bretton Woods. They will not go back to being dependent on the U.S. dollar for international commerce. Russia continues to send clear, unmistakable signals. And I think that propping up a piece of paper with ink on it is a really stupid reason to risk incineration of the surface of planet Earth. And I hope you agree with me. If you're listening to my show, I'm pretty sure you agree with me. So, moving on to Pentagate, because it is really cranking up over there. According to the New York Times, the White House has now decided that maybe it's time for Attorney General Eric Holder to resign gracefully, and hopefully that will calm the scandal down. Richard Nixon made exactly the same strategic mistake with John Mitchell, his Attorney General. Said, he's going to leave, it was all his fault, he will fall on his sword for me and I'll be safe. Didn't work for Nixon, will not work for Obama, because of the multitude of scandals that have come up. It's not just the Department of Justice spying on reporters. It's the Internal Revenue Service, and that scandal continues to grow because every day goes by. We learn of more groups, more political dissidents, more individuals who were intentionally targeted by the Internal Revenue Service for abuse, repression. Now we're learning that major GOP donors who had no red flags on their finances were being hit with audit after audit after audit after audit. It's harassment of political enemies and their supporters by the Internal Revenue Service here. Now, of course, the White House has attempted to... actually, I'm going to go ahead and take a phone call here. Ken in Oregon, aloha. Ken, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Greetings, Mike. I want to talk to you about the World War III scenario that you're talking about and how that goes back to Albert Pike. He predicted World War I, World War II, and World War III.
Well, as I understand it, so did Nostradamus, but I'm not going to start going into that.
Well, Albert Pike, the Freemason, you're aware of him.
Yeah, I'm aware of him.
Yeah, he predicted all three of these wars, and they're coming down the road just like he predicted.
Well, obviously, I was not alive for World War I or World War II, but I've been predicting the onset of World War III for pretty much as long as I've been doing WhatReallyHappened.com, which is coming up close to 20 years now.
Yeah,
you know, I think anybody with any perception, anybody who abandons belief in what they think the United States government is supposed to be, very clearly sees this path. I've been warning about this practice of using world wars to clear up all the red ink on Wall Street's bank balances,
Absolutely.
You know, for a decade now.
That's why they want to screw with the people, because it's profitable.
That's exactly right. War is the banker's richest harvest.
Absolutely, it always has been.
Yes.
Have you looked into the Paris Treaty of 1783?
No, I haven't, but I'll take a look after the radio show today.
Yeah, you look into that, and you look into, well, here's a scenario. At the end of World War II, MacArthur sails into Tokyo Bay on the Missouri, and the Emperor comes out and signs the Treaty of Surrender, right?
Actually, the Emperor himself did not come out and sign that treaty.
Right.
It was Japanese envoys.
His emissary, yeah.
Yeah, his emissaries.
Okay, well, picture this. Who signed the treaty on the bottom and who made the treaty up? In the World War II scenario in Tokyo Bay, MacArthur presented the document for the Emperor's emissary to sign as surrender and agreeing to our terms, correct?
Yes.
Well, in the Paris Treaty of 1783 that supposedly gained us our independence, the king wrote the treaty and we signed on the bottom.
Well, I think that treaty would have been technically null and void as of the War of 1812. I mean, treaties do not last forever. I mean, we've seen the United States violate and abandon treaties time after time.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting.
But we didn't abandon the King's Treaty.
Hang on a second. It's an interesting historical exercise to talk about the treaty back in 17 blah, 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 but any treaties between the United States and Great Britain were automatically rendered null and void when Britain attacked the United States in the War of 1812 to try and force us back onto private central banking. So I don't think it's really valid to wave that around as having any bearing on events of today. We know that treaties come and treaties go. Governments will sign treaties when they need. Well, look at Nazi Germany and Russia signed a non-aggression pact, which then Germany immediately turned around and violated. You know, the United States is in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty by using the threat of military force to coerce Iran into surrendering its rights under that treaty. So a treaty from 300 years ago, I don't think so. All righty. Anyway, moving right along, getting back to the present situation here. The White House has attempted to deflect criticism over IRS Gate and the targeting of all these groups and individuals and political dissidents, and now their donors. Conservative donors were being harassed with repeated audits. And the White House tried to evade that by claiming that these two rogue IRS employees in the Cincinnati office were behind it all. They just went rogue. They took it on themselves, completely unauthorized, blah, 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 blah. And it's really not holding up to scrutiny. And now those Cincinnati IRS employees are saying, no, we did not do this on our own. The orders came from Washington, D.C., and Washington is just trying to throw us underneath the bus to save themselves. And it is a reminder to those of you who do work for the United States federal government. That government will demand your loyalty and obedience. But they won't return it. They won't return that loyalty at all. As soon as you are no longer useful, as soon as you are a liability, the federal government will treat you no better than they treat ordinary American citizens. Representative Darrell Issa is out there reconfirming the IRS targeting of conservatives and political dissidents was directed by Washington, D.C., and Issa is saying the White House is lying. Big surprise there. And he called White House Press Secretary Jay Carney a paid liar, as if it was ever otherwise. That's what the White House press spokeslug does for a job. Lie to the press. Tell the press, these are the lies you will give to the American people. Obama is innocent of IRS Gate. Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. That's how the government rules over you, through lies, deceptions, and fraud. They don't know any other way to do it. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Huffington Post is trying to put the tax breaks for the wealthy as their headline story, and they're downplaying Turkey. And apparently over the weekend on the Talking Head shows, Karl Rove ripped into the Huffington Post because the Huffington Post was characterizing this whole IRS scandal as not having gone far enough because supposedly, according to Huffington Post, conservative political action committees are too political to qualify for 501c3 status. And that was the reason the IRS was justified in scrutinizing them. And of course, Rove came back and said, then why weren't liberal groups, Democratic groups being targeted? They're just as political. If this was all about whether they were really within the bounds of the requirements for a 501c3 or a C4, there should have been an equal number of inquiries into both liberal and conservative, Republican and Democrat entities, but there clearly wasn't. And Huffington Post is very clearly attempting to take the side of the Obama administration in this issue. All right, so we're coming up here on another break. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a phone call here. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I hope you're doing good in the life, too. Anyway, I was watching a Corbett report last night, and this whole thing about Syria goes back a couple of years, and it has to do with those massive gas lines that come out of Syria.
Well, that's certainly one of the agendas. Yes.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting how they James Corbett was bringing out. He had another guest out there. That am I on here still?
Yes, you are. You're on the air.
Oh, yeah, my phone is acting weird. Anyway, I forget the guy. He was over there in another European country there, but they were detailing out exactly what went into those pipelines and how Russia's got so much stake into them. And another thing I wanted to comment on was with Greece signing with Israel on some kind of a treaty like that. It just seems like Israel loses allies in one area and is trying to pick up allies in another area like that. It just seems like it's more for landing bases than anything else, you know.
Well, both Israel and the United States are losing allies faster than they can conquer new ones, and obviously the conquered allies aren't really all that allied, as Iraq is currently demonstrating. But you need to remember, war is never really started for only one reason. The way a war gets going is you have all these various groups, governments, individuals, banking interests, each who have their own particular reason for wanting the war to move forward, and when you get enough of those all together saying, yeah, war is going to solve our problems, that's when the war is going to happen. So it isn't just the gas, it isn't just the oil, it isn't just the Rothschild banking, it isn't just Israel's paranoia, it is a confluence of all of those coming together where these world leaders say, yeah, war is our best option at this point.
Right. The other thing I wanted to say real quick.
Yes, are you there?
Yeah, I don't know, the phone keeps acting weird. That's weird.
You must be, the FBI must be using old rusty alligator clips to tap your line, and, you know, it just sort of messes things up. Sequestration's hitting us all.
Yeah, anyway, the other thing I was going to say is those shows on Democracy Now! About the Memorial Day veterans throwing back their, what do you call it, awards for killing people and stuff.
Decorations,
That was the most touching to see like that, and to have them standing beside the those Afghans and stuff that are also working towards peace like that, and then basically saying, you know, that war is a racket, and how many there was a Vietnam vet there that was reading off names by proxy of those U.S. Citizens for soldiers that have actually defected that can't enter the States anymore because of being wanted and everything like that, you know. But yeah, everyone's catching on that these wars are all lies, everything like that, and that Jeremy Cahill with Noam Chomsky on Democracy Now! Was another telling thing about how the U.S. just bombed Laos and all that stuff just because they had extra planes and like that. The death that this country has spread is just amazing.
Well, it is, but again, the reason they were bombing just to get rid of the extra ordnance is so they could go on taxing people to buy new ordnance. And it almost really seems that every time the military stockpiles get too high and orders drop off to the military-industrial complex, that's their agenda to start a new war, to burn it all up so they can start selling more to the government. We got to take a break for station identification. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show here. Interesting little story getting back to Turkey. Apparently, Turkey's corporate media is showing cooking programs and pet shows and just anything else that they can. Erdogan has obviously told them will not report on the protests. We saw that in China during Tiananmen Square. The rest of the world saw what was going on inside China. If you were not actually there, you had no idea. In fact, a very good friend of ours, actually the minister who married Claire and I, was in China when Tiananmen Square was going down, and he was like about 10 miles away from it and did not see anything in the Chinese state media. So, and it's not going to work. The people of Turkey, they're on carbon-based net. They're just passing word of mouth. Erdogan has shut down Twitter and Facebook. He's trying to shut down all the social media. Turkey's corporate media is just absolutely pretending this is not going on, and it doesn't really matter. It really does not matter when you have that many people ready to rise up. Word of mouth, smoke in the sky, the sound of gunfire will get them going, just like the Minutemen in the American Revolution. Nobody called up and said, go to the battle. When they heard the sounds of gunfire, they grabbed their muskets and they went. That's exactly what's going on over there in Turkey right now. Now, getting back to Pentagate. We're seeing more and more information surface over the Fast and Furious gun-running scandal. And over at akfiles.com, they're reporting on another informant from within the cartel itself, the drug cartel, fairly high-up member, has basically come out and said, yeah, the United States government, at taxpayer expense, was supplying military weapons to the Mexican drug cartels. So the U.S. government is again caught gun running. You're not allowed to buy guns to defend your home. but you will be forced to buy guns to give to drug criminals in Mexico, who will then bring them back across the border into the United States of America. And the official story is they were trying to track the flow of guns by providing them, and gee, they got lost, and we have no idea who had it going on. But I'll tell you what's going on. This is a replay of Iran-Contra. Remember that whole gun running and drug running scandal operating out of Arkansas when Bill Clinton was governor down there? And they were building M16s, receivers that did not have serial numbers on them, assembling these weapons. They were flying them down to Nicaragua to arm the Contras. And it was all funded with cocaine that was being flown back into the United States under the CIA's license to smuggle that goes back to the Reagan administration. And the cocaine flowed out into our society, and everybody along that pipeline got incredibly rich. Some of that money wound up literally changing the political campaign, the political climate of the United States of America. It restructured it. The same way that proceeds from bootlegging changed the nature of our government during Prohibition. The whole Kennedy dynasty was built on rum running. Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger, and he made huge amounts of money. So did organized crime. And then as soon as they attained power, they repeal Prohibition so that upstarts can't use the same thing to take power away from them. And this is a repeat. Fast and Furious was a replay of Iran-Contra. And now they're trying to keep the lid on that one. Over at the EPA gate, it's now come out that the EPA director was using fraudulent email addresses to send out emails to, well, for example, attack people who criticized the global warming theory. And so, again, fraud at the highest levels of government agencies. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Pentagate, all these gates that are going on out there. And as I predicted would be the case, the one scandal that the corporate media is staying as far away from as they can is Benghazi and what actually happened there. Remember, I talked before about there are the little secrets, the little scandals in Washington, D.C. that are used to hurl back and forth at the opposing party, the opposing candidate, or as in the current case, used as a distraction from the great secrets, the ones that are so terrible that it would delegitimize the entire government. And that's what I think Benghazi is. Now, according to the latest polls, Hillary Clinton's approval rating is plummeting, their word, plummeting because of Benghazi. And people who are basically going along with the official story of what happened there are saying, oh, it was all her fault, it was her consulate, her representative, she should have made sure he was safe. And she's paying a huge, huge price for it. And it is affecting her viability as a candidate in 2016. And we know that's what she wants. In fact, the corporate media was reporting on apparently there was this secret deal between Barack Obama and Hillary when she stepped down in 2008 in exchange for Obama would support her when she ran in 2016. And now all of those carefully laid plans of Hillary Clinton are starting to fall apart because of Benghazi. And so the question we need to ask ourselves right now, at what point will Hillary try and save her 2016 campaign by ratting out Obama? Because again, what I think happened in Benghazi is that Obama staged an October surprise to try and bolster his approval ratings going into the November elections. Because in September, in August, summer of last year, Mitt Romney was ahead slightly in the polls. A lot of media pundits were already predicting Obama was going to be a single-term president and we were going to have Romney in the White House. And what I think happened is Obama sent in a special action team pretending to be al-Qaeda terrorists to kidnap the ambassador. Oh my goodness, it's another repeat of the Iranian hostage crisis. And the story would build for drama and just take all the media focus away from Mitt Romney's campaigning. And then Obama would resolve the situation, either sending in the SEALs or arranging a trade for somebody. It doesn't really matter. The whole point is he would get the ambassador back alive. He'd look like a hero. He'd prove he was not a new Jimmy Carter. He was not going to let this turn into another Iranian hostage crisis that dragged on for months. And it blew up in his face. Because the SEALs, some of the SEALs ignored their stand-down order. Remember, there were orders to the CIA and the SEALs and the rescue team to stand down. Do not interfere with this thing. And some of the SEALs refused that order, triggered a firefight. The Libyan people living around the consulate heard the gunfire and said, yes, they're kicking out the Americans, let's join in. And Obama's carefully staged, managed theater devolved into an uncontrolled riot, and the ambassador wound up being killed. And now they're trying to cover it up. And I think that is what really happened in Benghazi. It's the only theory that does fit all of the available known facts. We know there was a Predator drone overhead, real timing, a video of that consulate back to the White House. Now, the Predator's top airspeed is only 137 miles an hour. It's not built for speed. It's built for endurance. It's built for loitering. And it's not a fast aircraft, and that means that Predator had to be in the air on the way to Benghazi before the attack even began. And so now we're seeing this schism open up between Obama and Hillary Clinton. And I think at the point where she sees her dreams and aspirations for 2016 evaporating, she'll turn on Obama. She'll rat him out, even at the risk of delegitimizing the entire government. She is that ambitious. We're going to have a phone call here. Scott in Virginia. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I'm glad you're talking about Benghazi because it keeps trying to be buried by the media with this triple gate. And I agree with you. I think Benghazi is the thing that's going to bring down Obama's legacy, and it's going to ruin Hillary's future. Although I do differ on what really happened in Benghazi. My guess is, and I don't have any inside information, this is just my instinct. I think what happened is, the big lie is we didn't win Libya. The Libyan government is not unified. And to keep in mind, we supported the dictator before we bombed him.
Up until the point he introduced the gold dinar and said no more private central banking. Then he became the enemy of every Western nation.
Oh, no, I agree with you 100% on why we did it.
Yes.
But the people there don't trust us because we were an enemy to Gaddafi, then we were a friend to Gaddafi, and then we were an enemy to Gaddafi. And I don't think the Libyan people want anything to do with us. And I think what happened...
I would agree with that one, and I would agree that in a very real way, the United States did not win that war in Libya for the same reason we're seeing up in Iraq. The new government of Libya understands that they've probably got about 2 years before the United States could sell a new invasion of Libya, so they're just going to go and do what they want to do, and they're not paying attention to their U.S. masters any more than the people up in Iraq are.
Well, what I think what happened in Benghazi, the only thing that makes sense to me is why our forces were ordered to stand down is the people that attacked that compound in Benghazi, they were Libyan military. And that's the reason we were ordered to stand down, because had we responded, every American, British, and French person in Libya could have been a potential hostage, and that could have been even worse.
I definitely disagree with that theater. I think if the Libyan military had attacked the consulate, the U.S. would not have hesitated to go in because of the political fallout. If it became known they were Libyan military, there's no way to keep that out of the media, and the U.S. would have looked weak. Like they not only lost the ambassador, they lost all of Libya, and so
here's what.
And again,
part of my theory.
And again, let me finish the thought here. Just give me a second here. If this was an attack spontaneously by the Libyan military, then how did our government know they needed to put that Predator drone up ahead of time to watch the attack happen?
Well, because the Libyan government is not a unified government. You've got a part of that government that is allied with us, and part of it that wants nothing to do with us.
You're not answering the question. You're not answering the question I asked. If this was Libyan military that attacked the consulate, how did our government know about it enough ahead of time to put that Predator drone overhead? And if they knew about and hang on a minute. All right, we're going to let you go here because I need to get a point out here. If the United States government knew in advance the Libyan military was going to attack the consulate, why didn't they move the ambassador? Obviously, the U.S. government, Obama, knew this was going to happen ahead of time because it was the only way they could have that predator overhead when the attack started. If they knew it was Libyan military or somebody else they were not in control of, why not move the ambassador? Move him over to that CIA annex. That was supposed to be a hidden location nobody knew about anyway. So no, I'm not buying that this was Libyan military. I have put a lot of thought into this theory. And the only thing that fits all of the available known facts is this was Obama's October surprise to rebuild his public approval and distract the media from Mitt Romney's campaign going into the November elections. And it blew up in his face when the SEALs refused to obey the stand-down order and when just Libyan people living around the consulate heard the gunfire and joined on in. Remember, when Benghazi went up, it sparked sympathetic, spontaneous protests all across the Middle East. It just underlined just how angry those people are at American interference in their nations. And I think that's what happened in Libya. Heard the gunfire, the Libyan people said, yes, let's go get the Americans. And Obama's carefully stage-managed theater piece turned into a riot and the ambassador was killed. Epic, epic fail. And now they're starting to point fingers back and forth. Who's going to take the blame for it? I don't know why Obama really cares all that much anymore. He can't run for another term in office, but he's still trying to put the blame onto other people and put it onto Hillary, and Hillary is paying a huge price for it for her 2016 campaign. So again, the big question is, at what point will Hillary save her 2016 campaign by coming clean on what happened in Benghazi? Or will she get really, really depressed? Go for a walk in Fort Marcy Park. Anyway. Now, the head of the IAEA, Director General Yukiya Amano, has come out saying that Iran is not able to prove their nuclear program is peaceful. Now, any student of logic understands you cannot prove a negative. And the IAEA basically should come out and say they have found no evidence at all that Iranian's nuclear program is not peaceful. But Amano is definitely bought into this whole we've got to invade Iran at any price agenda. And so he's basically turning the absence of proof into a proof of nefarious intent. Now, I demand that my neighbor provide me with information proving his claim that he does not intend to rape my wife. And since he cannot prove that to my satisfaction, does that give me a right to shoot him dead preemptively? No, it doesn't. But that's exactly the logic behind this case against Iran. We can't prove they're doing something bad, but they can't prove to us they're not, therefore the war is on. The spin is definitely in. Interesting article over at whowhatwhy.com talking about the New York Times coming out with articles urging Americans to trust the authorities on the Boston bombing, and if you don't, you gotta be nuts. You're crazy to doubt the official story. They're grasping at straws over there. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we went to the commercial break, I was commenting on the New York Times. And it's not just the New York Times. We're seeing this all across the corporate media, that if you don't trust the official story, if you don't believe as we tell you to believe, you must be mentally ill. You're nuts. And inevitably, and we've seen this many, many times before, when questions are asked about the official story about anything, inevitably they try and, link it back to people who believe in flying saucers carrying little green men, and those people who think the Apollo moon landings were faked, and no plane at the Pentagon, and all these various other propaganda things they're doing. The difference, of course, is we, the American people, you listening to this show, know better now. You understand how that propaganda game gets played. And I think now that they're going into this thing, you have to be crazy not to believe the official story, shows just how devoid of legitimacy the official story is. They're falling back on tactics used by the Soviet Union to stifle criticism and dissent. Oh, don't listen to them. They're crazy people. Those nuts, they think Chernobyl is leaking radiation now. Anyway. Meanwhile, over in Newton, Connecticut passed a law in order to keep records of that school shooting private, to keep them from the public. And apparently one of the people who was pushing this legislation came out with this absurd statement that the Internet has completely changed the Freedom of Information Act, where this information that is made public is instantly everywhere beyond our control, and for this reason we have to start opposing release of records, lest something embarrassing gets out. 6 months on, we still don't have a final official report from that shooting, which we will tear to shreds almost immediately as soon as it's made public. But when they start passing laws saying we can keep these things secret from you, it's basically a flashing neon sign saying we have something to hide. Alrighty, Spiegel over in Germany is reporting Erdogan's grip on power is rapidly weakening. They're already saying Erdogan is on his way out, and they make an interesting observation there. Direct quote from the article. Thousands have taken to the streets across the country, and the threats to Erdogan's rule are many. His reaction has revealed him to be hopelessly disconnected. And Der Spiegel is absolutely correct on this. His escalation of violence and brutality is only making the situation worse. Same mistake Mubarak did. And I mention this because I have commented many times as we watch the U.S. government put out lie after lie after lie, and when the lies do not work, their reactions to those pointing out the lies. I've commented many times, it seems like the top levels of our federal government are disconnected from ordinary Americans, what they're thinking, what they're concluding. And that is when you get to the point where the government is on the verge of collapse, when they're listening to wishful thinking, and they're listening to all their paid analysts who are paid to basically tell the government what the government wants to hear, and less the reality of what's going on out there in the streets. I'm often reminded of the legend of King Arthur and Merlin the magician, and from a sociological political point of view, Merlin's real value to Arthur wasn't magic tricks. It was the fact that Merlin was not part of the court structure, and he could travel through society at all levels and find out what people were really thinking and then bring that information back to Arthur, so that Arthur was not effectively blinded by all the nobles feeding him whatever was in the noble's best interest. And Obama doesn't have a Merlin. Now, here's an interesting story. This came out of 1011now.com, and it's about this preschooler. 3.5 years old. He's attending Grand Island Preschool, and he is hearing challenged. And he has a special sign that represents his name. And it's a registered sign through SEE, where if you have a custom sign that represents your identity, they register it so nobody else is using the same sign. And SEE is Signing Exact English, which is the particular sign language this 3.5-year-old is using. And it includes pointing the finger at somebody. And the school is demanding he must change the sign for his name because of that pointed finger, because it violates the school's weapons policy. This is completely absurd. Now, I know a bit of sign language from working with a hearing-challenged entertainer who worked as a mime many years ago at Busch Gardens in Van Nuys. And he was signing ASL, American Sign Language. And the American Sign Language symbol for you is to point your index finger at the person you're talking to. There is no threat. The symbol does not represent a gun. And we're in a situation here where the gun grabbers, as part of their brainwashing of Americans to just completely wet themselves at anything that reminds them of a weapon, are they going to make all of the deaf people in America change that sign and learn to use and understand something completely different because a pointed finger is reminding them of a gun? Our educational system's gone right off the edge of sanity with this stuff. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show. I'm getting some emails that our Republic Broadcasting feed and my Justin TV feed have all of a sudden been cut off in Saudi Arabia. I wasn't even aware we had that much of an audience over there, but apparently that has now cut off. And the only reason I'm really concerned about it is that Russia Today, RT.com, is now unreachable as well. And obviously, before they really crank up this World War III, they're going to have to start going after the independent media. just as Erdogan is doing in Turkey in a futile, according to Der Spiegel, attempt to cling to power as well. Maybe it's just the deteriorating condition of our infrastructure, but it does appear that governments, last week, 2 weeks ago, Obama was out there saying it's the internet is the cause of our problems, and now Erdogan is saying exactly the same thing. Those gosh darn Twitter and Facebook people, they're getting the truth out there, and my rulership depends on maintaining the lies. Now, a lot of people have been very concerned about the United Nations Small Arms Trade Treaty and how it could be used to justify further infringement of the Second Amendment here in the United States, because under the Constitution, treaty obligations are the highest law of the land. And we have seen various politicians attempt to use that provision to suspend the Bill of Rights. Back when the North American trade agreement was put through, Hillary Clinton tried to claim that because of this treaty with Canada, Canada's gun laws were now in effect in the United States. That was a bit of a reach, and it didn't get any traction, but that's the thinking there. And Obama last week said he is going to sign this treaty, the Small Arms Treaty. But there's a little bit of a rub. 130 members of Congress are opposed to this treaty. And Obama can sign anything he wants. It doesn't become valid until Congress ratifies the treaty. Now, will Obama sign this treaty, claim that gives him the authority to impose gun control? Probably. Will Congress stand up to him and slap him down and say, no, you're not allowed to do that? Probably not. Will the Supreme Court stand up and say this is unconstitutional? Probably not. They're scared. And they don't care about laws and Constitution anymore. They want to keep that little party in Sodom on the Potomac going as long as they can. Meanwhile, the United Nations is holding a get-together regarding the legality and ethics of so-called killer robots. These are fully automated, autonomous machines that are designed to kill people in various combat areas. Please tell me they are not using Windows as an operating system on these robots. But these killer robots are being developed by the United States, Great Britain, and Israel. It is claimed they are not yet being used. We've had reports out of Israel to the contrary on that. But the United Nations is thinking about possibly imposing some restrictions on them, mostly because of the fact that, like landmines, they can kill a lot of innocent non-combatants. Now, another interesting dimension here, and this came over from the Intel Hub, would the U.S. military use these killer robots to violently crush down a revolution by the American people? And the answer is yes. The United States government has a past history of using against the American people weapons that are banned for use in war. And of course, I'm thinking back to that church full of women and children in Waco, Texas, that was gassed to death with a tear gas that is illegal to use on enemy troops in time of war, CS gas. So, boy, James Cameron really had it right in Terminator, didn't he? Now, over in Afghanistan, there's been a near miss as a German drone missed an Afghan passenger plane by just 2 meters. And this is an aspect, when they talk about the increasing use of drones here in the United States, they're completely uncontrolled. And there have been a couple of near misses here, but in this case, just 2 meters. If that drone had impacted on a sensitive part of the aircraft, if it had hit the cockpit, if it had been sucked into an engine, there would have been major, major problems. And these are completely uncontrolled, and as I mentioned before, we're being sold the drones to curb terrorism. But at some point, they're going to have to say drones cannot go into the terminal control area around airports, and those areas around the airports, because of the noise problems, they tend to be industrial sites. So if there were a real terrorist, and not these fakes running around pretending to be Al-Qaeda, like Adam Perlman and Joseph Cohen and his ilk, they just have to go into the industrial area near an airport, and they know there will be no drones overhead. Or the drones will be overhead, and we'll just be told that, hey, having, passenger airlines fall out of the air is just the price we have to pay to be safe from the threat of terrorism here. Now, according to the U.S. State Department, and this is kind of an unusual admission, they're admitting there is no active Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah terror cells anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. Well, then why are we being groped at the airport by TSA? Why are we putting up with our luggage being looted? Why are we putting up with our laptops being dropped and destroyed by these butterfingered bozos with their rubber gloves? All right, we're going to go back to the phones. The questioning citizen from Connecticut. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I'm glad you just mentioned the past, what you were just talking about, because I think we've got to look into language and what it really means. I don't think there is such a thing as Homeland Security. I think it's really gangland security.
It's government security. Both the Department of both FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security's real task is to preserve the government even against the American people.
And even against the Constitution?
Oh, yeah, that just goes without saying.
But, I mean, we talk about that, and we talk about things like anti-Semitism. I don't think there's any such thing, anti-Semitism. If you go by the dictionary, it's really against people, certain Arabs and certain native Israelis. Most of Israel is not run by Arabs. And if you want to play a shell game as to what Israel really is, I mean, especially with the whole stuff about going on about the central banks, this is really where it's coming from. I mean,
yes,
there is a group of people, I don't even want to call them Zionists, because Zionists makes one think it is a protection of Israel. I don't think it's got anything to do with Israel. I think one really should go back to the point of, even though it's, I would guess anyway, I would think that it's a fiction, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is really nothing to do with real Jews, but it has everything to do with what you call the money grabbers.
The money junkies, yes.
Yeah. I think that's really where it is. Because Israel, I mean, I'm Jewish.
Yes.
100% Jewish. And a lot of people that I know think, oh, well, Israel has to be there to protect Jews. But I don't think it's protecting Jews. In this day and age, it can be bombed out in 1 second. And
well, it's more subtle than that. I'm going to let you finish up here, but I want to get a point in here right now. Israel was founded as a place, an independent nation for the safety of the world's Jewish people, and that's a very laudable concept here. But the fact is that Israel's government's actions against their neighbors here in the U.S. subverting the government is actually making the world more dangerous for Jewish people, because Israel's government is constantly trying to blur the line between their government actions and the world's Jewish people. And for that part of the population that buys into that Israel's government does represent all Jews all over the globe, when the backlash happens, it's going to hit a lot of innocent people. And we need to try and avoid that.
Absolutely. I think it's a shell game. And I think, unfortunately, that the old definition of anti-Semitism really means that most Israelis and many Jews, I certainly am not one of them, because I also want to say that when I gave a party here for one of the members of one of the trips, not the Mami Marburn, the second one that was held up in Greece.
Yes.
Who was going, a journalist actually, who was going on that trip, I got a death threat in public.
Yeah.
From a group of people. They were Jewish. They said, we are watching you. We are watching you, and watch out for what you eat. Now, I couldn't have said anything to the police, but I did call the police, and I did call Homeland Security. You know, when they say, if you see something, say something. Well, I called Homeland Security,
and they did absolutely nothing. I've been through this.
Absolutely nothing.
I've been through the same experience myself here. I've kept recordings of every one of these threatening calls I've ever been given, and I gave them to the police and everything. One of these days, I'm going to put them up on a webpage, because some of them are actually kind of funny if you listen to them. The situation. Okay, go ahead and finish, and then I got a couple of comments.
This was serious because I didn't think the person who threatened me, this is a very affluent community here, Washington, Connecticut.
Yes.
The person who threatened me was not going to do anything. But he mentioned a group. Now, can you imagine if it was some Arab said a group of us are watching you, what they would say? The police told me, they called him, he said he didn't want to talk about it, so they said, okay, we can't say anything. Can you imagine an Arab group who said something like that to them?
Oh, be headline news all over the country. Absolutely.
I mean, there is no Homeland Security. There is no Homeland Security here whatsoever.
No, it's enforcing the government's, Homeland Security is actually government security against the people, against the Constitution.
Well, that's what it is. That's what 9/11 really was all about. 9/11 was to create these draconian laws so they could protect the thieves who are stealing all the money and not put them in jail and get away with it.
Well,
why they're taking the guns.
Okay, well, I'm constantly getting accusations, you're an anti-Semite, blah, 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 and the rest of it.
I mean, that.
And, if you remember that member of the Knesset who was interviewed on Democracy Now! Just came out and said, it's just a trick. When we can't win an argument with the facts and the law and the logic, we just scream anti-Semite to shut people up here. Now, anti-Semitism, again, going back to the dictionary definition, it is hating Semitic people just because they are Semitic. And, obviously what we do here at whatreallyhappened.com, we're very critical of the actions of Israel's government, which is a small group of people. And we're very careful to not make a generalization from what Netanyahu is doing and the world's Jewish people. It is Israel that tries to blur that line and say, oh, you're all just anti-Semites for criticizing what the government of Israel is doing. No, we're not. We're not anti-Semites. We're anti-sphincters, and there is a difference. And we need to keep hammering that home. We're not talking about race. We're not talking religion.
No,
we are talking about actions and deeds that are repugnant to human rights and need to have attention focused on them.
If that group of people wants to redefine the definition of protecting any of the crimes that Israel is committing, any of the crimes of what they call Jewish people are committing, then I think that one has to say that we are proud anti-Semites, if that's your definition. Just as we are proud anti-Nazis, just as we are proud anti any kind of a fascist regime.
Well, I think that's a very, very good idea. And, of course, the good news is Israel has so overplayed the anti-Semitism label, it's lost its shock value. And it is no longer really an effective ploy to silence people. Obviously hasn't worked on me.
Well, it's difficult, too, because we get this all over. We get this double header hitting us from both sides. I mean, if you oppose the Obama regime, which I did constantly, people thought we were Republicans. When I say Democrats are worse than Republicans, because in my town, I organized the impeachment of George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. In fact, we had many people there. And at that point, most of the town had been sort of Republican, but it's mostly independents here. That time, the Democrats were in charge, and they were the ones who stabbed us in the back. It wasn't the Republicans. I said there wouldn't be a real Republican, other than, say, if there was a real debate, the debate of the last election would have been between Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich. That would have been what one thinks of as real Democrat and Republican issues, which both have their own points.
Well, again, both parties are compromised, both parties are controlled. We saw that during last year's election where Ron Paul once again was railroaded out of the running because he's not pro-Israel, he's not pro-Federal Reserve. We saw that debacle over at the Democratic National Convention where the Democratic Party's own elected delegates voted down putting Israel back into the platform, and the party leadership said, we're going to put it in there. We perceive that the vote was overwhelmingly yes, and they're getting booed from their own elected delegates. It's a travesty. It's a joke. It's all theater and not very well produced, I might add.
Well, the whole thing is really getting to a point where you can't say anything and suddenly someone says, well, suddenly, okay, well, you're supporting this or that, and especially this thing about the IRS. Now, let's face it, they've attacked all the Occupy Wall Street people just as much. So if you say that you think it's outrageous that they should be going after the Tea Party, you're just as outraged, but no Democrat is standing up and saying, hey, they're going after us too, the ones Obama doesn't like, because he is truly, I would call him, I don't know if I can say this on the air, but I would call him the Republicans' ace of spades. I mean, literally and figuratively.
Oh, we'll get letters on that one, but I'm okay with you saying it here. And only because, it's starting last week, we're starting to see all these people come up and say, well, if you're opposed to Obamacare, it's only because you're racist, and it's only because a black guy came up with it. It has nothing to do with, skyrocketing insurance premiums and declining standards of health care. Those are trivial issues that no right-thinking American would ever question. You're just being a racist. Screaming that you hate somebody seems to be the propaganda of last resort. People.
Well, exactly.
You hate Obama because you're racist. You hate Israel because they're Jewish. You hate global warming or rather, you're opposed to global warming because you hate planet Earth and you hate Mother Nature. And that's really the propaganda of last resort.
So exactly. So I will say to those people, oh, what, you're against women? I voted for Cynthia McKinney.
Well, Cynthia was one I wish was still there, and of course we all saw how she got railroaded out of Congress as well.
Oh, yes, and we know why.
Joke. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back with another phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And that last caller made a lot of really good points we need to keep in mind here, and I want to follow up and reinforce it. The world's Jewish people as a whole are not responsible for the crimes of the government of Israel, although Israel wants you to think otherwise. The American people as a whole are not responsible for the crimes of the American government, especially in an age where the American government is just not listening to us any longer. Just as the world's Muslims are not responsible for the crimes of Al-Qaeda, whoever Al-Qaeda finally turns out to be. We know there's a lot of fraud going on with that. All right, back to the phones here. Jesse in Florida. Aloha, Jesse. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, this is regarding Ron Paul's campaign for liberty. I received an email over the weekend from him, and I'd like everybody out there to know, and I'd like to hear your comment on it. In the 830-page plus of the immigration bill, the national ID card has been incorporated for every single American.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know they've been pushing this agenda for a very, very long time to have a national ID card tied into federal government computers so they can basically, control whether you can seek employment or not. It's to make you completely dependent on the benign well wishes of the federal government to live your life, and I'm opposed to it. I'm absolutely opposed to it.
Absolutely, but I think we need to speak out and say something, don't you?
Well, we just did. Oh, anything? Well, just now.
Oh, okay. But wait a minute. I'm not finished.
Well, okay, you got 2 minutes.
Okay. I don't know if you were aware of Jeff Steinberg, I believe. He's part of Intel something or other, and he spoke for the LaRoche PAC, and it was about the British Empire. I would love you to have him on your show to let people know the British Empire, the city of London, and the dastardly deeds that they are, and the fact that, Obama is their lowly puppet.
Well, I don't think it's just London. I think it's just all the world's central bankers in concert. And remember, there is a section inside London, their financial district. It's called the Mile, and it operates as a semi-autonomous state, the way the Vatican does in Rome. And that is really that seat of power. So it's not the British monarchy or the British government. It is those private central banking interests that are holding the slave chains of pretty much the entire civilized world right now.
I agree with everything you're saying, Michael, but the thing is, this connects, for me, the depopulation that they want so badly. And I want to know your feelings. Don't you believe that this depopulation agenda that these nut jobs have is connected, or Monsanto is connected to it?
Well, I think Monsanto's actions are motivated simply by corporate greed coupled with incredible recklessness that's tolerated by regulatory agencies. I do know a lot of the 1%ers think there's a population problem, and there is, because sex is more fun than dying. I just disagree with their actions. I'm going to talk about this when we come back from the station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And following up on the call from Jesse and the population control agenda, the reality is that if you look at the surface of planet Earth, you will see there are vast areas of undeveloped wilderness still, all across Africa, up across Canada. The human population is very tightly concentrated in these cities, which are basically human ranches. Keep everybody collected together in tight little knots so you can sell them products efficiently, or you can tax them efficiently, or you can conscript soldiers efficiently. The reality is that Earth is not in danger from the current human population any more than it was in danger from human-caused global warming. It comes down to economics. When you have crafted a society of enforced dependency on infrastructure that is owned by corporations, you get into a situation where every dollar spent on infrastructure is weighed against its benefit. Especially as we head into a world of greater and greater automation for manufacturing and information processing. If the money junkies don't have a use for you, they just don't want to spend the money to build more support for more humans. They consider it a complete waste. It's the ranching mentality. If you have a ranch and you have livestock and the market is slow and you know you're not going to sell all of your livestock, you start killing them off. It's called culling. And that's what they're thinking, these money junkies. If they knew for a fact that they could build support systems for another 2 billion people, those 2 billion people would then feed the system and generate more wealth for them. You'd see the cities going up, left and right. But because of that Ponzi scheme banking system, most of the population is no longer able to generate real wealth to be harvested off. And that's the real agenda. Remember when Bush was talking about useless eaters? We don't want to spend the money to feed and house and care for people that we can't make a buck on. That's what's driving the population control agenda. Nobody wants to spend the money to build new modern cities. Nobody wants to spend the money to figure out cheaper ways to desalinize water. Heck, Nestle's out there saying there is no right to water. They want to own it all and make a buck off of it. It's all driven by money junkie thinking. And the thinking is, if a larger population is not going to be profitable, then we have to oppose a larger population. That's what it really comes down to. Jesse, do you have anything else you want to say?
Yes. I don't understand why you, everybody out there have to eat food that isn't labeled. It's Monsanto crap. Why can Michelle Obama have her own garden? I demand that be plowed under and replanted with Monsanto seed to feed to her 2 kids, and her husband.
Well, because of what just happened up in Oregon with the wheat contamination, Michelle Obama's garden at the White House may already be GMO, and they don't know it. That ought to be giving them something to think about.
I hope they get as sick as the rest of us out here.
I'm sure they probably will.
Thing is the Dodd-Frank bill, Section 2. I want people to read it because it's talking about nothing more than genocide. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Well, like I said, from the money junkie point of view, they would love a larger human population on planet Earth if it would be guaranteed to make them more wealth. But if you're not of use to the money junkies, they want you to just die and go away. That's why they're raising the retirement age and they're charging more for health care and providing poorer health care. Once you're no longer able to work to make them richer, they want you to just die and get out of the way. That's the new model. That's the end result of this trend toward fascism here. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with another phone call after these words from our sponsors.
And insurance companies, God knows who's going to have access to that. And, the other thing I find ironic is that, boy, Monsanto, if one of their patented genes blows into your field and they catch you with it, you're going to lose your farm and your livelihood and everything. But your DNA doesn't belong to you. And I would call it our government. I just call it the state now because this government is not representing me anymore. I just call it the state. And the state now says they own my DNA and they can take it, just basically trump up something whenever they want. And I just think it's really scary. I have a huge problem with it.
Well, and, I have a problem with it as well, because the value of DNA in criminal proceedings is it's a very gray area, because DNA does last a very, very long time. It's much easier to plant DNA on a crime scene than it is to forge a fingerprint. And again, let me give you a hypothetical. If a person committing a crime goes into the same public restroom that you just exited and gets your DNA on his hands, then commits the crime, and they find that DNA there, you could be in a world of trouble. There is no way to know where the DNA came from and the path it could travel. In fact, I would imagine that with this DNA evidence growing all over the place, that anybody who's planning to commit a crime like that would go to a public restroom and just run their hands all over all the surfaces and sinks and the rest of it, so they get the DNA of 20 or 30 people on their hands to obliterate that trail. But for me, the possibility that somebody could take your DNA sample that's been collected and plant it at a crime scene, again, it's much easier to do that than to fake a fingerprint, to frame people with. And that's why I'm definitely opposed to all these DNA databases. What happened with Monsanto's crops up in Oregon, or rather the wheat crops contaminated by Monsanto, should tell you DNA does not stay put. And that has to also be a consideration in looking at the value of DNA in terms of evidence in criminal proceedings. I think any decent defense attorney is going to be able to completely undermine the credibility of DNA evidence by saying, yeah, you found the DNA there, but you can't say how it got there. You can't make it coincident with the commission of the crime.
Exactly. No, I mean, I think you're right on. And, just for me, it's just, I guess philosophically, I'm in that classical liberal tradition, and I say classic liberalism in the sense, I own my own body, you own yours, and my thoughts, my body's mine. And this is just basically saying, no, you have no right to due process. You have no right. It really goes, I think, against the Fifth Amendment, the right to self-incrimination. I mean, they take my DNA and then they go, oh, look, they forced it out of me. It's almost like a forced confession in a way, by taking it, rather than them having to jump through the hoops and go through the right legal processes to take my DNA by a warrant, and that's how they've always had to do it in the past. They either trick you out of it, by putting everyone's seen the movies, right, with the glass of water on the table and you drink from the water and they get your DNA, or a judge issues a warrant and, you then have to, at that point would have to do it. No warrant anymore. Just, we're going to take it. Doesn't matter if we don't care. And then, it's off to who knows where. And it's just gone. That's exactly
it. And I question its value in a criminal proceeding. Again, it is going to be a lot easier to frame people for crimes planting their DNA than, planting a phony fingerprint. Okay?
Keep up the good work.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Bo in Indiana. Aloha, Bo. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Michael. Yes, I just wanted to point out how far back this general welfare clause, usurpation has gone back. If you look at the Articles of Confederation, they were drafted in 1777 and later ratified in 1781. Article 12, it shows them pledging us for the debt. So, there was the General Welfare Clause of the Constitution being fraudulently reassigned and putting us on the hook for the debt that far back. So that's how far this corporate welfare system actually goes back. I just want to make people aware of that. Tell me if I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong, but it could be argued that many of the laws passed under the General Welfare Clause did not, in fact, serve the general welfare. They served corporate interests by forcing us to buy things we otherwise would not use. It has been horribly, horribly abused.
Exactly. So, when people, are talking about the Organic Act of 1871 and, we became a corporate structure, then, no, I disagree. It goes back even further, and, you have to look at the Enablement Acts of 1802, and it's just, the fraud goes way back to the beginning.
Well, it's always been fraud. We understand that now. We are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. We know they lied about the ratification of the 16th Amendment. We know they've lied to us about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. These are not truthful people. And once Americans understand that government exists and exerts power through lies, fraud, and deception, the ability of the government to control us through lies, fraud, and deception becomes immediately diminished. And I don't think we need to really worry about arguing the fine points of the law and the Constitution. We just all agree that the government isn't following the Constitution. That alone right there renders it illegitimate.
Well, I think a reassignment of the General Welfare Clause back to the people is in order.
Well, I think the General Welfare Clause should never have been in the Constitution. It should have been in the preamble as a justification for what the government is doing. But once it was in the Constitution itself, it opened the door for all kinds of abuses. Now, back when the Constitution was written, it was accepted as, a fundamental principle that government existed to take care of the people. When government decides it's going to take care of government and the bankers and foreign nations, the General Welfare Clause just became part of the excuse for increasing federal control over all of our lives. And again, it could be argued that much of the laws passed under the General Welfare Clause do not, in fact, serve the general welfare.
Well, and then that being said, I could argue, and my argument is that I think it's Article 1, Section 9, Clause 3 or 4, somewhere in there about that says no ex post facto laws shall be passed. And if you look up ex post facto in Black's laws, I mean, if you read that with that context, that's where the Constitution ends, and everything else after that is commentary only.
I'm not sure I would agree with that. I mean, the definition of ex post facto is the government cannot pass a law retroactively declaring something to be illegal. Now, that, of course, is the foundation for so-called grandfather clauses with regard to government bans on things like certain firearms. I purchased this gun fully legally in compliance with the laws of the time. You don't have the right to come in and say it's now illegal, turn it in. That's one of the most obvious examples of where that would apply. But again, the issue here is that our government is really not abiding by the Constitution. They're trying to reinterpret it. They certainly have done that with many of the amendments in the Bill of Rights by changing the definitions of the words. They're trying to break free of the limits of the Constitution on several levels, and I agree that General Welfare Clause is one of the most abused.
Yeah, what did Kissinger say the other day, or a while back with Lou Radowski? If it's illegal, we just do it anyways. If it's unconstitutional, it just takes a little longer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He was being very, very candid in that. It was George W. Bush said the Constitution is just a blankety-blank piece of paper. He's wrong. It's actually parchment. But again, my position is that Constitution is the original contract with America. It is the rules and restrictions under which we, the people, allow the government to manage the nation for the benefit of the people and the nation. If the government doesn't want to abide by those rules, they're free to resign immediately. We got to take a break for commercials here. Thank you very much for the phone call, Bo. We're going to let you go. More callers waiting on the line when we get back from these words from our sponsors.
Now the reckless men.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Reese in Atlanta. Aloha, Reese. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? Great to talk to you. Given that our rulers seem to be working from the idea of rule through scarcity, I was going to bring up a research that I'm not sure whether you've followed, but have you looked into Dr. Judy Wood's research on 9/11?
Yeah, and I do not agree with it. Okay.
Well, here's the basic premise. The idea is that, you try to account for all the things that happened that day. And when you have 1,400 cars that were, fried in some kind of bizarre way, some up to half a mile away, you have to look at some other question than controlled demolition or some other solution.
Well, I know where this is going because she's pushing this idea of the micro nuke, but the reality is if you need a small explosion, then thermite or cutter charges are far more economical. A nuclear weapon of any size is a hugely expensive situation there, and for what happened for the cars surrounding the collapsed towers is actually very easily explained, because when those buildings came crashing down, the fire and air inside them was blown out through the lower windows like a giant bellows. And that's where a lot of that sideways velocity came from. At the scale of the World Trade Towers, the air is functioning almost like a liquid at that scale. And as the buildings came down, all of the air and fire trapped inside was simply blasted out through those lower floors, and that was what caused all that damage to the surrounding cars. Occam's razor applies here. So thank you very much for the phone call, Reese. We're going to let you go and switch over to Robert in Missouri. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to jump onto the DNA thing real quick. As a person that swabbed numerous people at my job, working inside of a correctional facility, people coming in on various types of arrests, before this one, we were already swabbing a whole ton of people, depending on what they were arrested for. Now it's pretty much just a blanket, hey, you get arrested, you're done. So, this is an incremental thing, and it's not some sort of just a spontaneous blanket change from one paradigm to another. I mean, if a guy was getting in an argument with his wife here in Missouri, and he got a domestic third, which was a misdemeanor, he was getting swabbed. So it was already bad. Now it's just real bad. And so, people are freaking out about it, but it's already been pretty Orwellian before in many of our states. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's also hideously expensive. They're talking about collecting the DNA of 330 million Americans. That process by which the DNA is analyzed and encoded for the databases, is not cheap. They're spending a huge amount of money to do this. And again, its value as evidence in a criminal proceeding is not very good at all, because you can find DNA at a particular location. You can't say it was deposited at this time that the crime took place. You really can't. And again, looking at the easy example, if the person who commits a crime goes to the same public restroom where you just washed your hands, they could pick up your DNA from there, just touching the faucets, or touching the front of the paper towel dispenser, or just leaning on the counter, and they could deposit your DNA at the crime scene. And so it's really not a very good forensic tool, in my opinion. And again, the potential for misuse is they can take your DNA and they can save it in a refrigerator someplace and plant it on a scene to say, oh, yes, this was the guy who went in to do blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it could be used as a bludgeon for those of us out here that don't, let's just say, toe the line. Those of us that have our own brain and our own opinions and are willing to speak truth to power, it can be used as a weapon against those sort of folks. But it also brings up this project for New American Century stuff with the race-specific bioweapons and DNA-specific bioweapons. You got a catalog on everybody in the country. You can pretty much, design a nefarious weapon of some sort for whatever demographic lives in a certain geographic area, which is kind of creepy in itself. What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, we know Israel's been trying to work on ethnically sensitive biological weapons for a great many years. It's just another excuse to set up a giant government bureaucracy and a database so that relatives of congressmen have a nice, cushy, well-paying government job. And again, it's a boondoggle. Huge amount of money, and its value as evidence in a real criminal proceeding really isn't all that good. And if you have a criminal proceeding, you can compel a DNA sample from the suspect with a warrant. There's really not much purpose to simply collecting everybody's DNA at this point, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and the potential for abuse, you know, if we trusted the government, it would be a different story. But this government having my DNA to play games with, absolutely not. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before I go back to the phones, just an interesting story. Remember, just put up at whatreallyhappened.com. This is from mondoweiss.net, where apparently Barack Obama is now telling all of his friends, the few that will still listen to him, that the reason he didn't keep any of his campaign promises to the American voter is his fear he would be assassinated. In other words, if he were to close Guantanamo, end the wars, bring our kids home like he promised to do in 2008, that somebody somewhere would take exception to that and shoot him. That's his new excuse. And I think it betrays a degree of panic in the Obama administration as Pentagate continues to swarm around him and his historical legacy. And he's grasping at straws. Oh, there was a reason I didn't keep the promise. I was afraid I would be assassinated. Well, if you're going to be the president and you're going to go out there and you're going to make some changes, you sort of understand there are going to be some people who don't like it. Harry Truman called the White House the hottest kitchen in America. And he's absolutely right. And if you can't stand the heat, you shouldn't be going into the kitchen in the first place. So I'm not buying this from Obama. He made promises he didn't keep. Now he's looking for an excuse. So we'll feel sorry for him. We'll feel so sorry for poor Barack Obama. He was so afraid of being assassinated. He broke all of his promises to America. I'm not buying that one. Back to the phones here. Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, the manufacturing data came out today, and the output was the lowest in 7 years. Therefore, Friday, the market got the idea that the Fed was going to start tapering back the purchases of the stimulus purchases, and took a 200-point drop. But I think the only reason the market, as soon as the data came out, the market started to drop a little bit. But then it started to go back up again, probably because, again, it looks like we're still in a recession. But the thing is, I wish now that the market realizes that this is all of these prices in gold and silver, commodities and equities is basically a Fed-driven bubble. And I wish now, instead of all the bailouts that we had with AIG and all Lockheed Martin and Bank America and all the banks that were responsible for the mess, I wish we'd get into another mess now, because I think the Fed has got its hands tied here, and there's nowhere else to go, and maybe we get that crash that we need in order to restructure our debt and continue to because nobody's going to bail out the people of the United States.
That's exactly right.
No way.
You're exactly right.
And
the federal government policy was exactly 180 degrees out of what would have worked to save the economy. The government adopted a policy of taking trillions of dollars from the American people and giving it to the banks so the banks could loan it back to the American people at interest, because that's what keeps the federal Ponzi scheme going. Had the federal government taken trillions of dollars from those Wall Street firms that grew rich off the mortgage-backed security fraud and distributed that to the American people, nobody would have missed a mortgage payment. There wouldn't be a real estate crisis. Nobody would have defaulted on their credit cards. There wouldn't be a credit crisis. People would have gone down and bought brand new American cars. There wouldn't have been a need for an automotive bailout. People would have gone down to the shopping mall and bought plasma TVs and Blu-ray players and all the rest of that. We wouldn't have a retail crisis. But the federal government's policy of looting the American people to prop up the banking system is a complete and utter failure, because those bankers couldn't find people who wanted to borrow that money that had just been taken from their pockets, because nobody's going to say, yes, you just took $1,000 from my pocket, so gladly will I go to the bank to borrow that money back at interest. Nobody wanted to go along with that. And the bankers mostly just put that money in their own pockets with these huge, obscene bonuses. And so what the federal government did may have been great for the bankers and the money junkies, but it was horrible for the people. And that, of course, is exactly what fascism leads to.
Again, the Fed states that it's going to take some of the alcohol out of the punch bowl. But again, I wish we came to a point. And you know what? There may still be some type of a catalyst, but I'm not sure what to correct this.
It's all going to come crashing down. It's all going to come crashing down here. There's a huge Treasury bond bubble. Even Bank of America is now admitting it. Mike, I'm going to let you go here because I need to cover some economic news before the top of the hour. We're going to close the phone lines here for a little bit because I got to get some points out here. Yes, the American markets did end in the green. They opened low, was bouncing around, and then, of course, plunge protection team comes in and shoves it back up into the green to keep the suckers into the market. Because all of these Wall Street firms have been buying huge blocks of stock to keep the stock market high, to keep investors coming back to Wall Street and buying these equities, to discourage them from pulling their money out and going into physical gold and silver or going into something else completely. The world markets were in terrible shape here. The Nikkei lost 3.7% again last night. Europe's markets all ended heavily in the red. It's only the American market that is constantly being pumped up by all of this quantitative easing from the Federal Reserve, which is buying the failed mortgage bundles from these Wall Street firms and basically dumping them on the American people, dumping the losses on the people to keep the rich that much richer. Now, Bank of America actually issued a warning saying you should sell your U.S. Treasuries because they're going to crash. Of course, Bank of America then went on to say you should sell your Treasuries and buy bank stocks. And that's, of course, complete nonsense here. Investors should be selling their U.S. Treasuries and their bank stocks and buy physical silver and gold. Because when the Treasury bubble pops, the Federal Reserve will no longer be able to pour $85 billion a month into Wall Street, and even if they do, that $85 billion won't be worth anything. It's going to be Zimbabwe time here. Now, Bank of America is pushing bank stocks because they, like all the other Wall Street firms, they bought these huge blocks of Wall Street stocks to keep the market propped up, and now they are trapped. When there is a major sell-off on Wall Street stock markets, all of these Wall Street firms that bought into this stock manipulation are going to be instantly insolvent. Investment expert Landsman, this is over at moneynews.com. The Fed tactics have insanely inflated stocks. There is a stock market bubble out there, and it has to explode sooner or later. And I think the warning signs are out there that it's imminent. And they're just trying to figure out some way they can make the American people cover those losses and keep the banks solvent. They went out there with foreclosure gate. Now they're talking haircuts. And it always comes down to the same thing. That fascist ideology. Make the people cover business losses to keep the banks going a little bit longer. And it cannot last forever. Japan having a huge problem with their bonds. They're hitting limit down. Now Japan is openly advocating a policy of just printing money out of thin air to buy more foreign assets. And the Federal Reserve is all upset. Hey, that's our scam. You're not supposed to get into our action there. Peter Schiff is reporting the Fed's Advisory Council is finally admitting this system can't work. In his words, we're screwed. They're finally picking up on that 11th marble. What a shame they weren't listening to my show and reading my website back in 2008. They probably were. They just didn't want to believe it. We believe there's more money out there. We believe that pyramid schemes can be made to last forever, or at least until after we die. Go to our graves rich here. Grant Williams is out there saying, do the math. It doesn't add up. This is over an Investment Watch blog where he's basically saying the same thing. The continued soaring of the American stock markets does not make any sense when you look at the underlying value of those publicly traded companies and their productivity and their actual sales. The value is not there to support these skyrocketing prices. Market manipulation is driving the stock market up, and the result is we have a stock market today that is more overvalued than it was just before the crash of 1929. And still we're hearing silver physical and physical gold is they're down. You know, you shouldn't be buying that stuff. China's demand for physical has quadrupled the gold premium being paid for physical over the paper trades. over at One News Junkie Blogspot, gold futures are shooting up to a session high following that dismal manufacturing data. You cannot run and sustain a national economy unless you have something to sell. Our manufacturing has been in steady decline since 1980, and now the world is turning away from our agricultural exports because of that horrible experiment with genetically modified product. Japan is refusing wheat shipments because of the contamination in Oregon. Now South Korea is saying they're going to do the same thing. Europe is going to start testing all America's agricultural imports, and they will reject any that are tainted by GMO genes. They don't want it there. And that means it's going to cost more to buy imports from the United States. And so those European importers, they're going to start looking for other sources that are lower in cost and less likely to be contaminated. It's a huge, huge disaster out there. We're hearing from other sources, and again from Investment Watch blog, that under Obamacare, the cheapest family health insurance plan is going to be $20,000 a year. And as a result of that, 2/3 of American families can't afford that. And that means they'll be paying the penalty fine to the Internal Revenue Service. The entire government and Wall Street are all about grabbing what's left of your money to put in their pocket. The last official act of any government is to loot the nation, and that's what's going on right now. The attitude of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street is that cash that's in your pocket actually belongs to them and they want it back. Now, over in California, huge, huge tragedy. This California wildfire has just gone completely out of control. Thousands are fleeing their homes, 22,000 acres, now probably now more. The carbonazis are out there saying, see, this proves their global warming. Look how hot it is in Southern California. Yeah, it's hot in Southern California. Half the place is on fire. The real cause for these wildfires is that as more and more money was taken away from caring for the nation and spent on war and Wall Street and Israel, maintenance of this country was cut. Budgets for the clearing of brush were cut, and the brush was allowed to grow and grow until it became a ticking time bomb. And we have seen this before, where the brush is not being cleared, where it's allowed to simply grow and create this overburden on the ground. The first fire is going to go completely out of control. This is what decades of slashing the budget for fire control leads to. Your tax money was supposed to be spent to care for the nation. That includes brush control, maintaining the fire breaks, so that a brush fire in one area doesn't leap across the entire county. And all that money that was supposed to be caring for your nation, and for you, the American people, it was siphoned off for wars, Wall Street, and Israel. And now those homes not already taken in these fraudulent foreclosures are burning to the ground. And I'm sure the Wall Street money junkies are celebrating all these homes going up in flames, because those lost homes create a shortage to drive the home prices up, thus stimulating the economy, because those homeowners are now going to have to go get new mortgages at huge inflated rates to replace their homes. It's just a horrible, horrible situation. There are always fires in that part of California. Years ago, I worked 2 summers at Six Flags Magic Mountain, which is right in that area. I worked as a magician. And one year I was there, same thing. The brush had been allowed to accumulate. The budget had been balanced by saying, we don't need to worry about fire breaks and brush clearance or anything like that. And we had this one day when there were brush fires literally on 3 sides of Magic Mountain. And they closed the park and they sent everybody home with return tickets. We didn't cheat them. And as part of the Street Theater Company, we all stayed in the park to make sure all the guests had been located and informed to get them out of the park. And I remember standing there in the middle of the park, and all the lights are still on, and all the machinery is still running, but there are no guests at all. And the sky was just this vision out of Dante's Inferno of smoke and heavy orange sunlight, and it was very surrealistic. And I'm rather sorry I did not have a camera with me at the time, because it would have been this amazing, amazing photo here. All righty, let's see. The new candidate for head of the FBI, Comey, is absolutely an unconstitutional supporter of tyranny and dictatorship. This guy's background, key role in covering up the darkest chapters in the history of the federal government. He's a master of the cover-up, and now Obama wants him as head of the FBI. And the FBI is always engaged in cover-ups. That's what got me started years ago on my website and later my radio career, was the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. And I found evidence in the FBI's own paperwork of fraudulent creation of false testimony, that there was no evidence of suicide at all. The gun found with the body had no blood on it, no fingerprints on it, and it's pretty sure that Foster didn't wipe the gun off after he supposedly used it. And I found all of this in the FBI's own records, which is when my career in Hollywood was absolutely destroyed. And since I suddenly had a lot of free time on my hand, I started focusing on uncovering more and more of this government wrongdoing, which is why I'm sitting here in this chair today. All righty, we already talked about the DNA situation. Petraeus, after being driven out of the CIA over his sex scandal, he's got a new job as chairman of the newly created KKR Global Institute. So he's got a cushy Wall Street job. That's his payoff for going quietly and accepting the blame for Benghazi to save Obama. When you fall on your sword, you will be rewarded. If you speak the truth, if you blow the whistle, boy, are you in trouble. Israel has uncovered a new organ trafficking ring. This one actually involves an IDF Reserve's Brigadier General, who I guess would know where all the freshly dead bodies are for harvesting here. Now, we've been following, of course, that horrible story about all these tornadoes in Oklahoma. If you were a fan of the Storm Chasers TV series, one of their storm chasers, Tim Samaras, and his son Paul, and one of their associates, Carl Young, were tragically killed. They were chasing a tornado. It turned on them. It's been a rough year for the storm chasers. We had that media SUV got hurled 200 yards. Fortunately, nobody was hurt in that. They had airbags and safety belts. It is a very, very dangerous thing to be doing out there, especially with this year's very violent storms. Going to take a break for commercials. Back with a few last news blurbs after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I had intended to spend a great deal of time on Monsanto. I'm going to hit a couple of topics in today's closing show, and I'll pull the rest over to talk about tomorrow. But we're seeing a lot of response to the revelation that a supposedly natural organic wheat field in Oregon was found to be contaminated with genes from Monsanto's unapproved Roundup-ready wheat. And what's more alarming is that Monsanto ended field testing of this type of wheat 8 years ago. And so it's had 8 years to spread all across America's wheat basket. And this is why countries like Japan and South Korea and Europe are already saying, we don't want that stuff here. This is a complete disaster. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt what we have been saying for years. They cannot control this technology. It breaks free. It gets into the wild. We have heard about all these farms who were found to be contaminated by Monsanto's GMO corn, and Monsanto sues them for illegal use of their patented technology, and the farmers are saying, we didn't want it. It blew here on the wind and on the insects. We didn't want it. We didn't contract for it. We should not be responsible for the fact that Monsanto is not able to keep their products under control. And the courts, tragically, continue to side with Monsanto. Oh, yes, you've got their patented DNA in your crop. You've got to pay them money. In some cases, Monsanto simply takes their farms. It's complete corporatization. And it's going to turn out to be disaster. We know that U.S. manufacturing data is showing, again, nobody's buying manufactured products, and now the rest of the world is terrified of America's agricultural exports. It's a double economic whammy. And again, it is because the U.S. government is too busy taking care of their investment portfolios to really pay attention to what's going on out in the country. Our government sold itself out to Monsanto's political clout. Our corporate media sold itself out to Monsanto's advertising budgets. And the result is we have a major problem with this technology spinning out of control. And the one that concerns me the most and should concern you are those experimental epicite corn genes. The genes that trick the corn into producing a spermicide so that anybody eating that corn can no longer reproduce. Because if that has gone wild, if it breaks into the wild, you're looking at an extinction level event. And I got a news flash for all you money junkies out there. You're going to get sterilized along with the rest of us. But not to worry, I'm sure Monsanto's laboratories are already developing their GMO Roundup-ready human being that you can buy from them if you want to have a child. This is the most dangerous technology ever released on the planet. Far more deadly in its consequences long-term than even nuclear technology. All right, that's it for our show. We got to head on out of here and get some errands done. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. A reminder, Republic Broadcasting's fundraiser is still going on. Please go over to republicbroadcasting.org, hit that donate button, send in an ounce of silver to John Stadmiller. The address is there underneath the contact page. Anything you can do to help. We don't get money from Monsanto, which is why we can tell you what Monsanto is really doing. Have a good day. Aloha, America.